Today I'd like to talk about a subject which can be all-consuming in the Revit world, and that is rendering. Okay, and by rendering I mean basically taking your project as it is and applying materials and lighting to it so that it looks more realistic, more photographic. And by that I mean if I just go to the graphic display options and I choose shaded, right, everything looks kind of gray, and mainly because I haven't applied any materials. Now, some I may have, like this front desk, I can't remember if we did that or not. If you choose under these graphic display options, choose the realistic option, you will see if there are any materials applied to your project. Now, I will warn you that running your computer in this realistic option will slow it down. Allow the computer 30 seconds there to generate the image. And by the way, if you click on these this view options, you'll see that there is one called Ray Trace. Don't mess around with that. It will almost certainly cause your computer to blow smoke out the vents there. It's meant to be a real-time rendering thing where you can kind of walk around the space rendered, but sadly it doesn't work all that well unless you're running a supercomputer. So anyway, and I'm going to actually go back to a hidden line here just to give my computer a little bit of a vacation there. Now, how do we render? Well, there's a couple things before we even get going, or one thing really, that I like to check. The crop region around your view, that's the perimeter of the perspective, will tell you how big the image is in kind of Revit's mind. If you click on that crop region, up here there's a button that says size crop, okay? And you can type in a value for the size of the image. And if you think about it, this is kind of like the size on your sheet of paper. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to lock the scale here so that the proportions stay the same. And actually, I guess 6 inches is probably a good size for an image. I'll hit apply. I don't know why it wants to make it 15/16, but whatever. Keep Revit happy. What that does, if you make that bigger, the size of the rendering increases kind of exponentially, and then it'll just take longer. Okay. So how do we render? Well, you have to call up the render dialog box, and it's right here on the view ribbon, view menu. You can also type in RR, or the button is available down here in this kind of quick access toolbar down at the bottom of your screen. Either way, it brings up the same menu. And here it is. It's the lovely rendering menu. There are a couple of settings here that you'll want to do when you're doing a draft. First of all, up here at the quality settings, choose yes, draft. And in fact, I would, unless you're running a very fast computer, stay away from these higher settings because they'll just slow your computer down like crazy. Other things that you can check, make sure it says screen. Okay, if you choose printer, you can change the resolution a little more precisely. So actually in this case, maybe I'll go with printer. I want a small number of pixels. Okay, see how that says 445? If I up the resolution, 3,562 pixels by 1502. So it has to figure out every one of those pixels. So you want the smallest number you can get for a draft. Surprised my screen number is that high, but whatever. I guess because I have a high resolution screen, that's why. Anyway, so that's another setting you'll want to change. Look for that smallest number of pixels for a draft. The other thing is here under the lighting setting, we want to tell Revit we want to do an interior rendering. And you might say, doesn't Revit know that? No, Revit doesn't know anything. Revit is not real smart. So obviously we're doing an interior. You can see that you can choose to force it to have just the sun, which means anywhere that there's a window or skylight or a crack in a wall, the light will come in. Artificial only is basically a night view. Okay, and of course interiors, it's important to know how they look day and night, so that's one that we're going to check. And then sun and artificial kind of combines the two. It doesn't do a great job of blending them, but it does it okay. And I'm going to use that one because I already have some electric lighting in my project. If you don't have any electric lighting in your project, well, it basically won't make any difference what you choose. If you have a space which has no windows, again, it won't make any difference because you won't have any daylighting. But in terms of what it looks like. But if you don't have any windows, choose artificial only. It will go just a little bit faster. Okay, so I'm going to hit render. Very long, less than a minute actually. You can see if we zoom in on this that it's pretty pixelated. Okay, a lot of zigzaggy lines. But what we're looking for here is just to see, can I see anything in this space? Is there any imagery that's showing up? Is there any lighting at all? And obviously, is there any daylight? Okay, you can, when you're in this menu, choose the Adjust Exposure button. Okay, and you can change a number of features, and you basically should always do this. Your screen lies to you. I know you find that hard to believe, but your screen is basically a light source, and it's going to make everything look a lot better, particularly those of you who had the foresight to buy a fancy screen on your laptops. It makes everything look so good, so bright. When you print this, particularly back in these areas here, that's going to be very dark. Okay, so adjusting the exposure ever so lightly. So, whoa, that's a little bit too much. Okay, go back to there. Also, the highlights can be brighter or darker. I'll just hit apply. See how it kind of dulls it out a little bit. That gets rid of a little bit of the burn that we were seeing here out in the front areas. Okay. You can also make the shadows lighter or darker. Again, some people find that they prefer darker shadows. Another thing that I like to do is reduce the saturation. This basically removes the color. Okay. And I find when I'm looking at the lighting to see if any of the lighting is working, that saturation is actually really handy. Okay. Reducing that. So anyway, there you go. You can see that this is the day lighting and electric lighting combined. Click OK. A couple other things that you can do in this menu. First of all, I can save it to the project. And what that will do, it creates an image file in the project that you can come back to quickly. The rendering process takes so long that this is a really good idea. So I'm going to just call this View to Back, Daylighting, and Electric. Okay. You can also export the image file. Choose Export. And it will allow you to save in a number of different file formats. TIFF files are actually the highest resolution that you're going to get. And those are great if you know you're going to go into Photoshop and do some Photoshoppery. Otherwise, for our purposes, JPEGs are just Jim Dandy at this stage of the game. Okay, I'm not going to save it because I didn't render it at a particularly nice resolution. Now, the last piece here is if I just want to show the model, if I just want to see that model again, I can just click that button and it brings me back here. It kind of unrenders the view. Okay. Now, let's quickly take a look at some of these other views. I'll try, well, let's just try the artificial only. Okay, and choose render. And you can see, because I've already changed the exposure value for the daylighting, you can see that it's actually kind of dark in here. Don't panic. You can always adjust the exposure and make it a little bit brighter. Okay, let's bring that up a little bit. And then we can, in this case, we might want to make the highlights a little brighter. Okay, and I don't know, I'll just leave the shadows there. Okay, so again, you can see it's fairly low resolution, just like before. But now we get a sense that this is a nighttime view, and you can really see the lighting on my sculpture and this kind of spotlight on the front desk. Anything that does not have much lighting on it is going to appear basically dark, right? Because there's no light on it. And anyway, and once again, I'll save this to the project just so I can return to it. View rendered just as with daylighting, okay? And we can take a look at those rendered views. If we scroll down in our project browser, you will see a folder appear from nowhere that has all those views you saved. You just double click on them to open them. And this is handy if you want to do a quick comparison. Okay, you can see here how dark it is in the back when I don't have electric lighting. And then the artificial lighting obviously is a very different appearance. And this is where you're going to want to really do some basic lighting design. We're going to have another lecture on advanced lighting. But here, so for example, if I thought, oh, this one's a little too white, all right. And also, a lot of you will notice some of your lighting is kind of yellow colored. This one's too bright, and this one's the wrong color. I know there's no color in this particular view. There's a real quick way to change that. Let's go take a look at the properties of those elements here. First of all, let me just go back to my view to the back. Okay, we'll zoom out a little bit. This guy here, if you get its properties, okay, and remember we've been working on families, and you are hopefully a little familiar with family type properties, okay. If you edit this type, you will see a number of properties based on the lighting. They're all down here at the bottom, okay. And the one that we're worried about, or the two that we're worried about, is this one here, initial intensity, okay. That's how bright it is. Now, I think normally Revit likes to do it as wattage, although you will find that some light fixtures are based on lumens. You can absolutely change these numbers. A typical 100-watt light bulb, 100-watt incandescent is about 1200 lumens. We can lower this down. This is basically kind of turning the light down to 750 lumens and see if that looks a little better. Okay, and this is particularly good when you have a fixture that's super bright. Okay, apply and okay. Now, my light fixtures that I created, they rendered a little bit yellow. Okay, and this is very common if you use the fixtures which come with Revit. They just, the color temperature, that's what is making them appear yellow. Again, you just go and you want to change the type properties. Okay. And we'll come down here at the bottom, and you see where it says initial color. We can change that number, and whoa, that really looks yellow. Now, of course, Revit dramatizes it somewhat. If you use these color presets, which you should, the one that looks best, even though it makes no sense, is the fluorescent daylight. Look how much more natural that appears. And this is essentially equivalent to a cool white versus a warm white fluorescent. Okay. The only trick is that Revit is not, you know, totally realistic. So anyway, I'm going to call up this render dialog box. I just want to see if these things look any different. So I'm going to do a region here. I'll just click this region button. And when you do that, this a little red box, you can change where that red box exposes the rendering. And what this will do is it will just render that little portion, because I just want to see if those lighting changes are going to work. Okay, and again, you just hit the render button. What you'll see is that just that one area will be changed. Okay, and this goes very quickly here. If you look at my timing, it took about 12 seconds. Okay, that's really not too bad, and suddenly you can get a sense that the lighting did change. In this case, I think I still have it set. Oh yeah, I still have it set to saturation as 0. Okay, but what you can see here, now see, that doesn't look particularly blue. In fact, it doesn't look particularly bright at all. I may want to up the luminous output, number of lumens output in that light fixture to get it to be a little bit brighter. Okay. The other thing is that if things are looking too warm in here or too cool, you can adjust these sliders. It's kind of a brute force way to do it. Doesn't always make it look all that nice, but again, it's a way to adjust things kind of quickly. I'm just going to hit reset, and you can see here this is kind of the default setting. We apply materials to all these things. Remember, everything's showing up as gray. What you do, go to the Axon view, okay, and I always just use this little house, the default 3D view, okay, and I actually like to periodically click the Close Hidden Windows View button so that I just don't use up too much of the power of my computer, which is quite limited, all right. And the other thing that you'll want to do, some people like to have it run in realistic view. Okay, I just make sure it's in shaded view. If it's not, I'm gonna use shaded view just because it's a little bit faster on my computer. So, all right, how do you apply materials? Well, there are a couple of different ways. So, first of all, if you remember from creating our family, that there are properties that are set by the family type. Okay, so I choose Edit Type, all right, and in this family, this front desk, you can come in here and define a base color and a stone color. And if you remember, what we did is we went in here and we said, clicked and chose, which one was I doing? Front desk here, and okay, and then the stone color, I made a color that was named AB front desk stone. And again, some of you may want to use an underscore or something like that. Apply. Okay. All right. And you can see that the colors change. The shaded views change. Now, what else can we do? And that's the same for the light fixtures. Okay. You change it in the properties of the family. Okay. Edit type. Okay. And you come in here. Now, what if you wanted to have two of the same light fixture but with different materials? Well, you would apply the materials here, and you could come in and I don't know, I'll make it brass or something like that, and maybe we'll make the whole thing brass. Just whoops, because we want to. Okay, go in brass. It's also alphabetically really easy to apply, so it goes quickly in my videos. All right, there you go. And apply. So now the one with the long stems are all going to be brass. If you want long stems but a different material, duplicate this one and choose long stems, whatever, another material. Okay. And now what you'll see is, the same menu, right? But if you change these materials, now I've changed all these, and okay, I can have one of them be brass, because it's the aluminum one. All right. You can also do this in the family editor by creating new family members, okay, new family types. And again, just duplicate the family type here in the edit type menu. Now, other things that you can paint are pretty straightforward. You just actually use a paint bucket. Who loves the paint bucket? We all love the paint bucket, right? It doesn't actually look like a paint bucket. You would think that they would make a paint bucket. I mean, come on, that's really what it is, but go figure. The engineers at Revit are just not into that kind of thing. And it works very much like your average paint bucket from SketchUp. Click on the paint bucket tool, all right? Choose a material. I'm going to choose brass, again, because it's easy to grab in the menu. Many objects will allow you to come in, and you see how it highlights the surface, okay? And I know it's a little hard to see, but when you click on a surface, it will dump paint on that surface. It is important to rotate the model around because Revit doesn't always paint those back sides, okay, in this particular method. So that's a quick way, and there are a lot of surfaces that you can paint this way, including even the rails, or I'm sorry, the stringers on the stair here. Let me zoom in. I believe we can paint those a brass color. I like brass because it shows up really well when you view it. Okay, let's see. Some surfaces are going to be reluctant to paint, and that's just kind of the nature of it. It does sometimes help to change the angle of the view or hit tab to see if you can get that surface. You see how I can tab around and get the top surface and paint it. All right, tab is this great kind of universal thing that allows you to change which object is selected. So that's a really easy way to paint a lot of objects. What you'll see, here, let's go and we'll paint the floor. Well, we'll hold off painting the floor. Well, we'll paint it carpet just because we can. Again, as you're painting, be careful what you're mousing over, because it's going to highlight what you've got, but it will also give you a tooltip. So if you've got a lot of objects around, in your right near your cursor, it can be hard to tell which one you've got. So in this case, I'm going to just mouse around till it says floors, and I think I've got the right surface, although it's not changing color, so maybe the material itself. Okay. Now that actually is a good segue into the next learning item, which is how do you make materials anyway, and how do you set up their properties? It's pretty straightforward, okay? And by the way, I keep forgetting to mention these keyboard shortcuts. PT is a shortcut for paint. I believe there's one for the materials menu. No, I guess not. The materials menu is on the Manage ribbon, okay? Just go to Materials. And what it does, it brings up sort of that same dialogue that we were looking at when we had the paint bucket active. And what you'll see is all your materials listed and their properties. So let's start with this carpet that I applied. Let's see if we can figure out why it didn't show up here. First of all, you can kind of see the rendering appearance like we saw in a previous video. You can kind of check the image. There's other factors that are visible here, if it's got any bump maps or glossiness, okay. That looks right, and the graphics look correct. I usually check this Use Render Appearance, I think I mentioned that, so that it shows up nice and red. Hit Apply and OK. And maybe when I did my painting, I just grabbed the wrong material. That's also a possibility here. Let's go Carpet, and either that or I'm just not getting the floor the way I think I am. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. Maybe I was just painting something else. What you will find is that as you navigate through your model, you will discover the things you accidentally painted that you didn't want to. All right, so let's go to back to Manage, go to the Materials menu. What if you wanted to just create a wall paint? What if? And this is a very common thing that we do. First of all, you could go and start with a new material like we did before. The advantage of starting with a new material is that it has a lot of options, okay? It basically has all the options for rendering that we need. However, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new material. Now, like I mentioned, all the typical features that occur in a generic material are going to show up here: bump, tint, all sorts of things. I have a page here that will kind of indicate to us more or less what those mean. This link is on our links page on Canvas. And each of these, you can just kind of drag the slider here and take a look. So roughness / glossiness. Again, these are probably things you're familiar with. You can drag it and see the more glossy it gets, the more it reflects. Same with a bump map. It's a little bit of an odd concept, but you can basically take a picture and Revit will apply a bump based on that. Wherever the picture is black, the object will appear to kind of poke out a little bit, and wherever it's not black, it will basically recede, okay? So a bump map basically makes the surface appear to extrude. Glossiness, again, very similar to shininess. All right. It's a kind of a surface characteristic. What's this one? Oh, a cutout texture. You can take an image, and wherever the image is black, it will make the material disappear. You'll cut it out. And wherever it's white, it will appear to be solid. And you can control how much it cuts out. But often we will do it this way if you want, say, a chain link or a welded wire fabric or something like that. This is a good way to do it. Texture offset, frankly, I don't even understand this one. And not all materials use this one, but it allows you to kind of manipulate a material so that it adheres to surfaces in different ways. Anyway, and then tint, you can take, like, say, a red brick, and you can make it appear darker brown or lighter brown just by controlling that. Metallic finish, most rendering programs actually have something like this where, you know, you can say this is metal, it's supposed to be super shiny, as opposed to something like, oh, I don't know, laminate, which might not appear quite so shiny. All right. And then you can fade in and out an image. So if you have a material that is image-based, it can be very sharp, or it can kind of recede. Sometimes the image for material can be too bright. So anyway, also, you, like we saw, you can make materials that glow, and you can control the color temperature of that glowiness. Finally, a couple of other ones, refraction. If you have, say, a glassy or transparent material, how much objects are kind of distorted through that glass is kind of a really interesting one to play with. And you can even use image maps, where you take an image and things can be more or less illumination around that. Anyway, and then tint as applied to hardwood, so basically the same idea as the previous tint. What I like to do sometimes for certain materials is I go to the asset library. You just click this replace this asset button, okay? And the asset browser, you can go and choose the appearance library, which is sort of Autodesk's little gift to all of us for choosing their software, which is a whole bunch of kind of pre-made materials. So if I choose, I'll just choose pink to start with, just to show you. Just double click on it, and what you'll see is that it changes the appearance over here to pink, okay? It is basically the same generic default material for paint. Is if you come down here to the wall paint area, and a lot of people like this. I actually kind of like it. Let's go with the canary here. I'll double click on that asset, and I'll close this. What you'll see is that the paint options are slightly different than the generic material. And this is true for a lot of things in a lot of materials. They'll have different options. So for example, I could say it's a roller or a spray, and that will have a different appearance. You can also choose paint specific finishes, like I'll go with a pearl here. You won't notice this quite so much immediately in your rendering, because we're rendering at a low resolution, but if you have any close-ups or you have any unusual lighting effects, you will notice that. If you're running a quick machine, I would strongly recommend changing these render settings to production quality. And you'll see it takes a little bit more time for Revit to kind of create the preview, but this is super handy for seeing the preview of what your changes are going to be. I'll give mine a minute to complete its rendering. So it's still updating my screen, but you can see here that it is starting to look a little bit nicer. Also, by the way, if you mouse over each of these fields, there is often a description of what the material option is doing. Okay, so adjust paint texture to roller, fine bump, brush streaks, or spray smooth. Okay, so actually I think I'm going to go with roller. All right. Now the other thing is I'm going to set this back to draft quality. You can change the different shapes here. For example, I could go to let's go with a sphere, very common option, and you can change the size of the preview as well just by using the drag menu here. You can drag the size of it. I would strongly recommend, if you're twiddling around with materials, that you make the window size, preview size, a little bit bigger. It really helps to see what you're working on. So anyway, I'll hit apply, and now I have a nice sort of semi-gloss or pearl yellow paint. I'm going to make another paint here, once you've created one of these, you can duplicate the material. Obviously, it now says yellow paint 1. And I'm going to make this one blue, go with the whole IKEA theme. Now, one of the tricks is you have to remember when you have used one of the assets from the asset library, if I change this color, for example, we'll change it to blue, and OK, what you will see, hit apply, is that both of these materials, they're using the same asset, the yellow one and the blue one. Okay, that asset, it's kind of like a, I don't know, a reference book. And so they're both looking at the same page on the reference book. What you need to do is duplicate the asset, okay? And it even says the asset name up here, Canary 1. If I duplicate it, and I believe there's a way to change the name, but I don't know how to do that. Anyway, now when I change one of these, and we'll just go back to Canary here, you'll see that this one looks the way we thought it would. This one should go back to blue, okay? So very important, if you're duplicating materials here in the materials library, absolutely go and change the asset, duplicate the asset. Now, other things that you can do when we're creating custom materials, if you have, say, a flooring that you want or a different stone, you often are not going to be so happy with the materials that are in Revit. So for example, this one, if you remember, it has a kind of pattern to it. It's more like a flooring, okay? So in fact, what I'm going to do, I'm going to change this, and I'm going to call it AB, we'll just call it stone flooring, okay? And, there it is. And I'm going to duplicate this guy, and I'm going to call this one AB marble, okay? And what you can do is we'll come over here, I'll keep the render settings the same. Under the appearance, I'm going to change this image, okay? So I'm not going to use this asset anymore. Just to be sure, I'm going to duplicate it before I mess around with anything so that I don't change the image associated with that asset. And then what you can do, you can go over here where it says image, and you can click on the image itself. This is, it'll bring you to the materials library that kind of downloaded with Revit. And there are a zillion materials in here, and I'm not going to look at every one to find one that I like. What I'm going to do, I'm going to browse on my computer and find one that I know I downloaded that I really like. Okay? And what I like to do is keep all of my image files, all these materials files, in a folder, and I just call it image files, or you could call it materials or materials for this project. Okay, and it's really a good idea to have a folder for your project. And let me see if I have a material that I like. On a PC, you can click the Views menu and choose Thumbnails. And oh, there we go, Seamless Marble. Okay, and for those of you that may not remember when we learned a little bit of Illustrator a year ago, seamless is a magic word. Okay, I'm just going to double click on that real quick to see what it looks like. Seamless is this word which indicates that the left side and the right side of the image match. So when you tile this image, when Revit kind of takes a copy of this image and moves it over here, moves another copy over here, that those sides will line up and it will appear as if it's one continuous material. So when you hunt around for materials, be sure that you use as one of your search terms, seamless. You can also filter your search results for an image size. Large is probably good, so that it's not dotty. And you will find that most manufacturers also have a lot of seamless materials on their sites. Okay. Now, you might be saying, why doesn't it look seamless? Well, in this particular material, it has what's called a relief pattern. Isn't that a relief? And this pattern, I'll just click on it, it basically makes it look like it's tile. Okay, so Revit has this ability to kind of fake it if you don't have a tile image. And sometimes tile, the problem with them is the shadow line is just not very clear. But anyway, it is a nice feature because you can kind of tweak how deep that shadow line is. Doesn't that look nice? Oh, yes. Except that I don't want tile, so it doesn't look all that great if you don't want tile. I'm going to turn that off for this particular material. And you can see now that the material looks a lot more like marble. Okay, and I'll hit apply. And okay, and we'll go back and we can apply that marble material here to my front desk. What did I have here? Oh, I had, now it's called, see how it changes in this menu. And this is a lot of Revit, is a lot of these going in and out of menus. The things which are more easily manipulated, things like using the paint bucket. Let's go up here and we'll use maybe yellow paint. We'll paint this wall a lovely yellow. Okay. And we'll paint this back wall. It doesn't look blue in the preview. Oh, there we go. Not sure why the preview isn't working, but that's just life here in Revit land. Again, just be sure you're aware of what you're painting and how that surface is going to change its appearance. Okay, it's very easy to paint that back wall, but uh-oh, that corridor is yellow too. Okay, now, so when you render this, you will see those materials show up as intended. Now, what if you want to paint the stairs? Well, therein lies a little bit of misery. Stairs, as we have all found, are a little more tricky. If you click on it, there are no type properties which allow you to change it. What this is an example of an instance property. If I double click on the stair, and I get to the sketch of the stairs themselves, now I can edit that sketch and change the tread and the riser material in here. And again, you'll want to have some materials created. I think I'll paint these terrazzo. The stair looks a little different. I just used a white terrazzo. Now, what if we want the flooring to have a slightly different color? Oh, let me finish editing here, my stair. What if we want to have a patch of floor that has a different material on it? What can we do about that, Professor Brody? Well, there's a couple of things. Let me just zoom in on an area here of the floor, and we'll change this area right over here so we can see it in our perspective. The way you do that, there is a modified tool called Split Face. And what this does is it allows you to define an area of an object that is a different material without actually kind of having to draw a whole another piece of object, another section of floor or wall. So I'll click Split Face, and it wants to know which face do you want to split. It is important that you be able to find the right face. Usually if you mouse over something, it'll find it. Sometimes you have to find the edge of that floor. And you can see here how it doesn't recognize it. I can click all day. I do have to find the edge, and now it finds the floor. And we go into this sketch mode, and we have seen sketch mode for a number of different types of tools. In this case, it's very similar to sketching walls, floors, ceilings with irregular boundaries. You just basically have some drawing tools. You can draw away, create a continuous loop, and that loop cannot cross the perimeter. Okay, the perimeter is this kind of orange colored line, which is very difficult to see. And when I click check, well, you might say that doesn't look any different. Well, it doesn't look any different because I haven't painted it. If I paint it, allow Revit to save, do whatever you want, Revit. And if I choose, let's go in here and choose brass, because it shows up so well. Whoops, I painted the wrong one. But you can see that they're different materials. Let's see if we can get the right one here. We'll just use yellow. Okay. And it should grab just that region. Now, you might say, well, that's not all that exciting. What if I have some asset that I want to use? Let me go back here to my sketch. Let's say I had an AutoCAD file. Okay, you can actually load that AutoCAD file in here. I'm just going to import a CAD drawing. Okay, so insert, import CAD. You don't have to do this, but I can do it. And, oh, except I don't want that one. I want, let's see, I think I have, oh yeah, I have a cow that I wanted to bring in. Why do I have a cow? I don't know. I just have a cow. So I'll click the import AutoCAD drawing, and what you'll see is that somewhere in my project there's a cow. Isn't that exciting? Let me just grab this outline here. And you can get this either from AutoCAD. So if you remember, we had an AutoCAD template that had a bunch of lines in it. You can also use Adobe Illustrator and use image trace and get that same thing. And once this is in here, these are just lines. You can do a number of things to them. You can scale them. You can make them, bigger, smaller. You can rotate them, of course. The only trick is that these boundaries have to be continuous, and there can't be any extra pieces. So if you use something like image trace, see how it has this little extra piece here? I got to get rid of that. Okay. But anyway, usually if you have a continuous boundary, it will work just fine. And you can come in and do a different paint material and have a yellow cow on your floor or whatever strange thing that you want. Okay, so that is the basics of applying materials. Again, you can do it through the object properties, the family properties, or you can use the paint bucket for instance type of properties. So let's take a look at the rendering and see how it looks. I'll go back to my street level view. And again, you can shade this, and you should see some additional colors. And now when we render it, and I believe that I liked the rendering with the, which one looked best? I don't know. Sun and artificial looked pretty good. We'll go with that one. So you can see all the wacky materials that I applied, including the cow, are showing up. Okay. Now, a few other things that you can do to refine your project. For most of you, getting the materials on and at least getting a few light fixtures in there is really going to make a difference. Now, one trick for creating lighting without actually creating lighting, Revit doesn't do a good job if you don't have any lights in there. But if you go to your ceiling plan, you can insert what are called studio lights. Okay, and studio lights, well, there are a default studio light that is basically, I don't know, a glowing bulb hanging in the air. And the way that you insert that, you can just load it in. If you go to Insert, Load Family, and then go to Lighting, and Architectural, and Internal. You all followed that, right? That wasn't too fast. If you scroll down in this list, there is this magic fixture called a studio light, and it just looks like a glowing bulb. Okay, I've already got one in my computer on my project. Now, what I do is I obviously like lighting. I think it's critical to the project, so I use my own special studio light, which I have created, and it has a couple of features. First of all, here's my studio light. It says Studio OmniLight Brody, okay? And if I'll just take a look at the properties real quick. And I'm going to post this to Canvas so you guys can use it if you want. And basically, this ball comes into your project, and I have a couple of different light outputs, okay? 3,000 lumens, 1,500 lumens. Just, consider this is about a 75-watt bulb. That's 750. So, you can, I don't know, those of you who are familiar with incandescent bulbs, you can kind of go with that. I think 3,000 worked better. And you can tune these up and down, okay? So each one that you have in your project, and you should just kind of scatter these around, will help you get some lighting. I also created another studio light, which is a directional light, okay? And you can see here it's a 40-degree spot that's angled 60 degrees from the ceiling. And we're going to talk about lighting in greater detail in a later lecture, but needless to say, this allows you to have more narrow spots. So if I go to 10-degree spot and OK, whoops, except I need one of these guys selected, 10-degree spot, you'll see that the center of this beam is a lot narrower. Okay, it still has some spill light, but it is much narrower. And that allows you to have a highlight on an individual element. For example, you know, some if you have a, I don't know, a cup or a table on top of a table, you can really highlight that cup by tweaking this. And each of these you can change the light output and the color temperature if you desire. Okay. Now, you might say, how come on my reflected ceiling plan I don't see these cones of light? Again, the simplest lighting, you do want to be able to aim it if you're using any directional light fixture. And these light fixtures here are just the light fixtures I used in a previous lecture about lighting. They're a spotlight with a 60-degree tilt, not my studio light. But how do you know which way they're going? You have to go to that Visibility and Graphic Overrides menu right here. You can just type in VG also. And scroll down under Lighting Fixtures. Make sure your light source is turned on. If you turn it off, all those cones of light, see how they disappear? Okay. I'll turn it on, and you can change the color. I had it at this lovely, lovely color here. But if you're have bad eyesight like me, you can also make the line weight a little heavier. See how those really show up very nicely. And now you can select the lights, and you can rotate them. Okay, just using the rotate command. Okay, and the rotate tool, by the way, you can drag the base of the rotate tool anywhere you want. So make sure it starts at kind of the base of the light fixture. And you can do that either in plan, or if you're looking at it in section or elevation, you can rotate those guys around to your heart's content. And that's really the only way that you can aim light fixtures. Is one, you have to choose a directional fixture, one that has a spotlight or a flood or whatever it is, and then you have to aim it typically in ceiling plan. It's obviously this is a very reflective surface, but we do have a glowing area. Okay, and what if we wanted to paint, say, I don't know, above a ceiling, create kind of a cloud effect? Well, to do that, let's go back to our axonometric view here, and you can paint any surface. And in fact, I'm just going to swing this around. Using your section box, you can paint areas above ceilings. I'm just going to drag this up, and now I think we're seeing above the ceiling here. Oh yeah, keep going until we get to the top. And I can use that same paint bucket, and I can apply my glowing material. Whoops, come back. To the top of the ceiling. Again, you have to tab around to get the surface that you want. Okay, see how that's bright? I can also paint the face of these beams. Now you might say, how do I paint the underside of the beams? Same way, use your section box, and again, just drag these draggers. And if you're not seeing the draggers, rotate your model around, or you can even go into hidden line view. But now, see how I've cropped away the floor? I can come in here and I can pretty quickly change the properties of these materials just by painting them. It's a little hard to see here. Go back to this. But you can use the paint option in this view as well. So, all right, we've applied a whole bunch of materials. What else can we do in Revit rendering? Basically that gets you started, but you might say, well, how did I get these people in here, these photorealistic people? Basically, those are what are called entourage, and you can load those in, load the family, and go to entourage, and you'll see a couple of people. I'll show you in class how to get them off of the desktops. We have a whole library of additional ones on the desktops. Now, when you work on the desktops, and a lot of you, when you're rendering and starting to render, your laptops may get a little kind of inefficient. So to work on a desktop, obviously you copy the Revit file over, but you also have to copy those image files, all right? So remember I made a folder with my image files. Drag those onto your computer, either the downloads folder or whatever, but drag the whole folder. And then in Revit, you need to tell Revit to look at that folder, okay? So I'm going to go to the File tab and choose Options. So on the Rendering tab, you can define where the where the computer looks for files. You just click this little plus sign, Add Value, and what it does is it will allow you to browse for a folder on your computer somewhere, if it's the documents or wherever it is that you have some folder. You can choose that folder and choose Open, and it will remember that. I've saved a random one because I didn't have any here. But you'll choose, if you're on one of the desktop computers, wherever you have copied your folder of materials, okay? And then Revit will look for those. If you don't do that, when you open this file in Revit, it won't find any custom image-based material. What I haven't mentioned is how to handle excuse me, imported objects. This object is created in SketchUp, and I believe I exported it as a DWG file. This is actually a fairly complicated subject, so I have a whole separate video. As I might have mentioned, SketchUp is great because there's so many different things you can do in it. In terms of geometry, there's a vast library of objects, but they do need a little preparation. Just as a general thing, these, you can't change their materials through their properties. You have to go to the Manage ribbon and look for the Object Styles menu. All right, so we have done all this stuff. We've done all this rendering to see if the lighting works and the material works, right? We've gone through this menu pretty carefully. We could come in here and just say, well, why don't I just set this to the best setting ever, okay? And why don't I set this to 600 DPI, get 1,000,000 pixels? Why wouldn't I do that? The reason you wouldn't do that is because it would take forever on your computer. Revit provides a nice way to render these drawings in what's called the render cloud. And you might say, oh, I've heard of the cloud, right? Go to the View ribbon, and you'll see right below our render button is the Render in Cloud menu. And when you click on that, you'll have to log into your Autodesk account, that same account that you used to download Revit in the first place. Okay, so don't lose those login credentials. And this information box, kind of step by step, pops up, and it allows you to choose a view or views to render, and then it can actually email you or just have a pop-up menu that will tell you. You can also view these things online, which is awfully handy. I usually check this box, don't show me again, because I'm impatient. And you'll see here when you do sign in, your login credentials will show up at the in the upper left of or upper right of your screen. So the cloud rendering, first of all, you can render your view that you're in. You can also render a whole bunch of other views. Okay, and I'm just going to stick with the street level here. Usually we render a still image, although you will someday learn that there are other ways to render. You can choose different qualities, standard or final, and the image size, it no longer is looking at your crop region to give it a size. It's now basically looking at just how many pixels you have. I'm going to go with medium for now, or even small, which will take less time. The other thing, exposure, advanced exposure, basically means Revit's cloud gremlins are going to figure out how to render your drawing. In fact, what they're doing is they're exporting your model to 3ds Max, which is another rendering program, very powerful, super ridiculously complicated. Anyway, we don't need to worry about that. And then finally, what image file format do you want? You'll have a chance to change all these later, but a PNG is awfully handy. One of the reasons is there's this thing called the alpha channel. I'm a big fan of the alpha channel. If your view looks out of a window, if you activate this alpha channel, what it will do is it will leave that as transparent. Okay, and that's really nice if you want to put in a background, say a cityscape or something like that. You can do it in Photoshop, and you have a lot more kind of controls over how it looks. Okay, now last thing down here, you'll see it says 0 credits required. If I were to crank this up to the maximum size, it says 8 credits required. Well, we don't really care because we have unlimited credits. But what you'll see is that if you do multiple views at the same time, it'll only let you go 16 at a time. Okay, 16 credits. So finally, you can have it email you. I don't usually bother, but you can do that. Anyway, click the render button, and what you'll see is that the thing will render in the cloud in the background. You can continue working on your project. To see the rendering, go to the render gallery. Just click on that. And here is my render gallery. Let's see, this is my current one. So I'm going to click on View Project and see how it looks. Okay. And again, it may ask you to log in if you haven't already. And there you go. There's my rendered view. You can see it has all the materials that I talked about. It has a decal. It has my cow on the floor. And it has my light, which I still think is too bright. You can see it has the 2 different light sources here with different materials and color temperatures, and even my glowing material. So, and this is great. You know, it's really quick and easy. And then once you have it in here, there's a couple of other things that you can do. First of all, you can adjust the exposure here in the online menu. So for example, I do think it's a little dark, so I could lighten it right up, and you see how it adjusts just like that. What's nice about this is it's kind of a real-time exposure change, so you can see, like, I think those highlights are a little too bright. My white marble's getting washed out. And again, experimenting with these to get things just the way you like it is a great thing. I often crank down the saturation just a little bit. Watch what happens when I do that. See how it's a little less kind of, I don't know, annoying? And colors can be just really bold. You can do this in Photoshop as well, but I find that most rendering software, it gets out of control. You can do it right here. Finally, if you do have a color temperature issue, you can modify the white point, make it a little warmer or a little cooler. Sometimes when we adjust the lighting color temperature, it can get a little bit out of control. So anyway, there you go. That's the cloud render adjustment settings. It will hit those and apply. The other thing that you can do is you can download the image. Now, before we do that, this image size is not particularly high resolution. We can re-render this image. Just click the re-render button. And what you can do is just basically choose a much higher resolution. What they conveniently do is they give you some sizes here that will help you to kind of understand how big it is. 8.5 by 11 is more or less right. You can also just type in a value. So I believe it limits you to 4,000. Okay, and 4,000 is a pretty good image size. That'll get you a pretty high quality rendering. The rest of these are probably fine, except that you'll want to change the rendering quality to final. Okay, I usually go with this transparent background. That's the alpha channel. I don't know why they don't call it alpha channel here. Again, I don't even have a window in this particular view. I just do it as a habit. There, finally done. Beautiful rendering. Doesn't really look any different on the screen. To notice, you're going to have to download it. And we get one last chance to choose if you want a transparent background. Again, I mentioned that I like the PNG file. And here it is. And you can see it's pretty nice. If you zoom in on something like the marble, there should be a fairly decent level of accuracy. You can see how that looks like one giant kind of impossibly large piece of marble. All the materials are reflective or stone-like or carpety, depending on how you created it. I even am getting a pretty nice shadow underneath here, just like my inspirational image. So there you have it. That's the basics of rendering.